Most people think lack stays because they're doing something wrong, but the truth is far more surprising and far more empowering. Lack doesn't persist because life is against you. It persists because you've been unknowingly loyal to the emotional version of yourself who doesn't have. And once Neville Goddard reveals this, nothing about your old understanding of money ever feels the same again. Think about it. How many times have you worked harder, tried more techniques, or repeated more affirmations, only to watch nothing change? It's not your effort that's failing, it's the identity behind the effort. The emotional state that keeps whispering, "I hope something finally works." That whisper is the real cage. That whisper is the reason the end lack Neville Goddard spoke about seems so far away. Neville taught that you can't experience anything you're not conscious of being. And here's the paradox that shocks people. You can want abundance with all your heart, while still emotionally identifying as someone who lacks it. Desire and identity can contradict each other, and when they do, identity always wins. That's why understanding the law of assumption explained clearly is the turning point most people never reach. You've been taught to fix lack by changing the outer world. Work more, save more, hustle more, try harder. But what if lack doesn't exist out there at all? What if it only exists in the emotional atmosphere you keep stepping into without noticing? Feeling it real Neville style isn't about pretending. It's about shifting into the version of you whose life no longer revolves around not enough. And here's the part most people never consider. The moment you change who you believe you are, reality has no choice but to follow. Not someday, not eventually, instantly, internally first, then externally. That's why creation is finished, Neville emphasized, because the version of you who already has what you want is already alive within your imagination. Imagine learning that the reason money feels hard, opportunities feel distant, and progress feels slow has nothing to do with intelligence, luck, or timing, and everything to do with the identity you were taught to carry. The identity that was never really yours, the one you're about to release for good. Because once you understand the real cause behind lack, you'll never fear it again, and you'll finally see how to end it at the root, without force, without strain, and without waiting for life to change first. So let's go deeper, because what comes next has the power to shift the way you relate to abundance forever. Lack doesn't stay because someone's desire is unrealistic. It stays because their inner state keeps rehearsing the feeling of not having. It's subtle, almost sneaky. Most people don't even realize how often they slip into that identity. The moment they wake up, their mind runs the same old script of, "I hope something changes soon." And that script becomes the emotional atmosphere they live in. When that atmosphere feels real, reality simply agrees. He's seen this pattern in so many people who swear they're focused on abundance, yet carry the emotional posture of waiting. Waiting for the blessing, waiting for the breakthrough, waiting for the moment life finally says yes. But waiting is still lack. It's still the opposite of live in the end. Neville Goddard would say, the end lack. Neville Goddard talks about isn't a curse, it's just familiar. And familiarity feels true until questioned. More than once he's watched someone declare confidently, "I'm manifesting abundance," while every gesture of their body whispers scarcity. The shoulders tense, the breath shortens, the face tightens in doubt. Words and state tell two different stories, and when those stories conflict, the state wins, always. It's the foundation of the law of assumption, explained in its simplest form. He often teaches that imagination creates reality in ways that are effortless, organic, and quiet. People expect fireworks, but the real shift happens in the tone of their inner world. That tone is shaped by what they feel real Neville style, not by what they intellectually recite. The world doesn't reflect what someone says they want. It reflects what they feel they already are. He loves reminding people that creation is finished. Neville meant this literally. Every version of you already exists. The version who has what you want is just a different emotional frequency. When someone touches that feeling, sometimes just for a moment, their entire relationship with lack begins to dissolve. It's like stepping into a warm room after standing in the cold for years. People often look at their bank account and conclude that lack is the truth, but he gently points out how upside down that thinking is. The bank account is the last place to look for truth. It's the final echo of old assumptions. When someone starts practicing feeling is the secret, as if abundance were normal, their nervous system begins shifting first. And the nervous system shifts long before circumstances do. He's watched people suddenly realize that they weren't blocked. They were simply loyal to an outdated identity. It hits like a soft punch to the chest. On one hand, they feel embarrassed. On the other, hopeful. Because if the issue was identity, not fate, then everything becomes flexible again. That's the doorway into wish-fulfilled identity Neville Goddard emphasized so profoundly. He often gives simple practices, like imagining the feeling of receiving a casual, "Congrats, you did it" text. No fireworks, no drama, just normalcy. That scene carries the emotional signature of abundance far better than hours of overthinking. The mind believes scenes that feel ordinary, not scenes that feel exaggerated. This is where lack and abundance Neville teachings truly come alive. He sometimes recalls stories of people who manifested effortlessly because they stopped trying too hard. They weren't affirming all day. They were simply living as if abundance was no longer a question. They stopped checking for signs and started assuming the identity of someone for whom things work out. When someone finally rests in that identity, lack has nothing to cling to. So when lack persists, he never sees it as failure. He sees it as a state someone hasn't stepped out of yet. States feel real because they're practiced, not because they're true. And the moment a person becomes curious about shifting their emotional center of gravity, the entire game changes, which naturally leads to the next insight. You only experience what you are conscious of being. He often says that life is not responding to what you want. It's responding to who you believe you are. This is the core of the law of assumption, explained in the simplest way possible. If someone sees themselves as the one who needs, the world has no choice but to match that identity. The mirror can't show what isn't being projected, and identity, more than effort, is what shapes a person's experience. He likes using everyday examples, like a person who walks into a room thinking they're unnoticed. Suddenly they interpret everything, tones, glances, silences, as proof that they're unseen, not because it's true, but because it matches their state. This is how feeling it real Neville style works at a practical level. Your inner definition frames every interpretation. Consciousness colors the world before reality has a chance to speak. He once shared a story about a woman who prayed every night for abundance, but woke up each morning with the identity of someone begging God for help. Nothing changed until she stopped praying as the needy one and began praying as someone already supported. That single shift softened something inside her. Soon, opportunities she once overlooked suddenly felt natural to receive. She hadn't changed God, she changed self. Neville Goddard always insisted that imagination creates reality, but not in a mystical way people can't grasp. It's psychological. People imagine themselves through their internal dialogues, through the small comments they make under their breath. When someone mutters, "I always struggle," they aren't describing life. They're creating the frame through which life will express. And lack and abundance Neville teachings always return to this one principle. He often asks people to notice how they introduce themselves mentally. I'm trying, I'm waiting, I'm hoping. These are identities disguised as casual statements, and every identity has a matching reality. The wish-fulfilled identity Neville Goddard taught isn't about pretending. It's about stepping into a sense of self that feels congruent with the life you want. A new identity pulls new experiences into motion. He sometimes jokes that the universe has a very simple job: to agree with you. If you say, "I'm overwhelmed," it nods. If you say, "Everything works out for me," it nods. It doesn't question, correct, or argue. It mirrors. And this is why end lack Neville Goddard emphasized doesn't happen through force. Identity is quieter than that. It's the silent baseline vibration behind every choice. He loves sharing an analogy. Imagine two people walking through the same city. One feels like life is against them. The other feels supported. They see the same streets, same opportunities, same strangers, but their internal lens makes the experiences completely different. Consciousness filters reality like tinted glasses. This is why live in the end matters. It changes the tint. He's watched people try to change their finances without first changing their self-perception. They hustle, take courses, save every penny, but still feel like someone who's barely scraping by. And inevitably, life keeps reflecting that inner scarcity. Feeling is the secret because it shifts who you are, not just what you want. Identity is the foundation beneath every manifestation. He tells people that the moment they stop identifying as the one who needs, things begin reorganizing. Not instantly, not magically, but naturally. The opportunities that once felt unreachable now feel obvious. The conversations that used to intimidate now flow. The world hasn't changed, the self has. And when the self changes, reality follows out of loyalty. So if someone feels stuck, he gently reminds them, you can only experience what you are conscious of being, not as a punishment, but as a compass pointing toward freedom. And this naturally opens the path to the next revelation. Trying to fix lack externally will never override an internal assumption rooted in insufficiency. He often tells people that the biggest trap is trying to solve lack where it doesn't exist, in the outside world. They rearrange circumstances, chase new strategies, and try to fix the symptoms. But symptoms aren't the source. Neville Goddard taught that the cause is always internal, always a state of being. Trying to fix lack externally is like repainting a cracked wall without repairing the foundation. He's seen people take massive action with a heart full of fear, hoping effort will drown out insecurity. But effort born from insecurity simply multiplies insecurity. This is why the law of assumption explained so much about inner alignment. If the assumption is, I don't have enough, every action becomes an attempt to compensate, and compensation never creates true abundance. He uses the analogy of a person trying to fill a bucket with holes. No matter how fast they pour, it keeps leaking. The holes aren't in life, they're in the identity they're operating from. Feeling it real, Neville makes this so clear. If someone feels like the one who lacks, the world mirrors that feeling. The outer hustle can't override the inner belief system. He once watched a man take 3 jobs trying to escape debt. He worked harder than anyone, yet somehow always returned to the same emotional ground. Not because he was lazy or unlucky, but because his assumption remained, I'm drowning. Imagination creates reality through the identity that feels real, and the one drowning will always interpret life as yet another wave to survive. He reminds people that lack isn't a number, a bill, or a temporary condition. It's a state, and that state colors every decision. Someone in lack avoids opportunities that look too good, sabotages chances that feel too big, or distrusts blessings that seem too easy. This is how End Lack Neville Goddard taught begins, by shifting the inner atmosphere, not by wrestling with external forms. He often shares a simple example. A person receives money unexpectedly but still feels unsafe. Within days, something happens. A bill, a repair, an emergency, and the money disappears. People call it bad luck, but he calls it loyalty to an emotional baseline. Feeling is the secret explains this perfectly. The inner thermostat always returns to its set point unless the identity changes. He loves pointing out that abundance is less about what someone does and more about what they stop doing. They stop acting from fear, stop forcing outcomes, stop monitoring results like a nervous parent. This softening allows the wish-fulfilled identity Neville Goddard described to rise, and that identity doesn't fight for abundance, it expects it. He's spoken to entrepreneurs who changed their mindset before their business. They stopped seeing themselves as the desperate beginner and started feeling like someone whose work naturally attracts success. Without any new strategies, they began noticing opportunities already around them. The world hadn't changed, only their inner posture had. Lack and abundance. Neville teachings are always about posture. He gently warns that 3D action without inner alignment breeds exhaustion. When someone tries to make it happen from scarcity, the journey feels uphill and heavy. But when the inner state shifts first, the exact same actions feel lighter, clearer, even enjoyable. The difference isn't the work, it's the one doing the work. This is the essence of Live in the End. So he always brings people back to the same truth. Outer action can support abundance, but it can never replace identity. Trying to fix lack from the outside is like rearranging furniture in a dark room. The layout changes, but the darkness stays. And this naturally leads into the next realization. Lack ends the moment identity shifts at the root. He loves reminding people that identity is the quiet engine behind every manifestation. Someone can hope, pray, affirm, script, and visualize, but if they still feel like the person who lacks, nothing truly shifts. The moment they start seeing themselves differently, really sensing a new version of self, things begin rearranging almost effortlessly. This is the heart of the law of assumption explained in its purest form. He often uses a simple analogy. Identity is like choosing which character you're logged into in a game. If you log into the struggling version, you automatically inherit that character's experiences, limitations, emotions, and outcomes. Switching identity is like selecting a whole different avatar. Wish-fulfilled identity Neville Goddard emphasized works exactly like that. New identity, new storyline. He's seen people fight their circumstances for years, only to experience breakthrough the moment they adopt a new inner stance. They didn't work harder, they shifted who they believed they were. Feeling It Real Neville style isn't about imagination for imagination's sake, it's about emotional relocation. Once someone relocates internally, life simply catches up. He has a friend who once lived paycheck to paycheck. No matter how much she earned, she always returned to zero. One day she decided to start acting like someone who manages money with ease. She didn't force anything, she just carried herself differently. Within months, opportunities, raises, and support showed up in ways she couldn't have predicted. She ended lack because she ended the version of herself that needed it. He likes pointing out that identity change isn't loud. It's not always a big declaration or a dramatic moment. Sometimes it's as quiet as no longer reacting to old triggers, no longer panicking at the sight of a bill, no longer doubting small blessings. These subtle shifts signal that lack and abundance Neville teachings are taking root. The cycle breaks at the level of who you are, not what you do. He often asks people to notice when they're still performing lack behaviors, constantly checking bank apps, rehearsing worst-case scenarios, over-explaining their situation to others. These aren't actions, they're remnants of an identity. End lack Neville Goddard meant stepping into an identity that no longer resonates with those patterns. When the identity dissolves, the patterns lose power. He loves this analogy. Imagine wearing a coat that's 2 sizes too small. At first, you tolerate the discomfort because it's familiar. But once you try on a coat that actually fits, you wonder how you ever accepted anything less. Identity is the same. Once someone experiences the comfort of being aligned with abundance, the old lack identity feels as tight as that coat. He's watched people make small decisions that signal identity shifts, choosing peace over panic, choosing trust over worry, choosing clarity over confusion. And strangely, these tiny choices create massive ripple effects. This is why imagination creates reality, because the self you identify with internally becomes the magnet for every experience externally. He teaches that identity shifting doesn't require evidence. In fact, it must come before evidence. If someone waits for proof before shifting identity, they stay stuck in the loop of, "I'll believe it when I see it." But Live in the End flips that script. Once someone believes first, seeing becomes inevitable. Identity becomes the seed of every result. So he gently encourages people to experiment with being the version of themselves who already has what they want. Not pretending, but genuinely trying on that state like a new outfit. And once they do, the next step becomes easy. Imagining a simple scene that implies the desire is already fulfilled. He always emphasizes that imagining the end doesn't need to be cinematic or dramatic. In fact, the simpler the scene, the more powerful it becomes. A quick congrats message, the feeling of a bill easily paid, or waking up in quiet relief. These tiny moments carry the emotional code of the wish-fulfilled identity Neville Goddard taught. Simplicity allows the scene to feel real instead of forced. He often tells people that the subconscious responds to normalcy, not exaggeration. When a scene feels like part of an ordinary day, the body relaxes into it. This is where Feeling It Real Neville style shows its brilliance. The subconscious doesn't fight a normal scene, it accepts it. And when it accepts it, reality has no choice but to reflect it. He's watched people overcomplicate visualization to the point of exhaustion. They try to script details, create perfect images, and force emotions they're not feeling. But imagination creates reality through the emotion of familiarity, not perfection. A simple congratulations text or the sound of a zipper closing on a wallet with money inside. These small scenes carry massive creative power. He loves sharing a story about a man who imagined nothing more than his wife saying, "I'm proud of you." He didn't specify the reason. He didn't visualize a particular achievement. He just felt the softness and warmth of that moment. Months later, he received a promotion that aligned perfectly with that scene. End lack Neville Goddard taught begins with emotional implication, not specifics. He encourages people to choose scenes that make them exhale rather than strain. If imagining a big mansion feels too distant, imagine something simpler, like checking your phone and feeling peace instead of panic. That single emotional shift can create a stronger signal than hours of forced visualization. The law of assumption explained this well. It's about assuming the state, not constructing a movie. He often suggests imagining moments that happen after the manifestation, not during it, like feeling your shoulders drop in relief or noticing how you naturally talk about your new life in casual conversation. These moments happen beyond the miracle. They belong to the normal life of someone who already has. Lack and abundance. Neville teachings always highlight the power of these aftermath scenes. He's seen people unlock abundance by imagining scenes that lasted only 2 seconds. A brief handshake, a soft laugh of relief, a quiet gratitude while closing a door. The subconscious doesn't need 10 minutes. It needs authenticity. Feeling is the secret because the feeling communicates the identity behind the scene more than the scene itself. He often explains that the scene should feel like slipping into a memory of the future, not something you're trying to make happen, but something you're remembering as if it already did. When the scene becomes a memory instead of a wish, you've crossed into the realm of the fulfilled state. This is where live in the end becomes natural and effortless. He loves pointing out that whatever scene someone chooses must contain one thing: finality. A moment that symbolizes it's done. Whether it's a phone buzzing, a toast with a friend, or simply waking up with a deep sense of ease, that moment anchors the identity shift. And once the identity shifts, the external world rearranges itself to match the assumption. So he always instructs people to choose one simple, repeatable scene and revisit it gently, without strain. Over time, the scene begins to feel inevitable, as if life is already moving in that direction. And this leads naturally into the next insight. The emotional frequency behind the scene is what cures the feeling of lack at its root. He always reminds people that feeling is the secret, not because it sounds spiritual, but because emotion is the language the subconscious actually understands. Someone can repeat affirmations all day, but if their body is vibrating fear or tension, the message doesn't land. Gratitude softens that tension. Peace rewrites the emotional baseline. Certainty shifts the entire identity from hoping to having. He loves using a simple example. Imagine drinking a warm cup of tea after a stressful day. The body relaxes before the mind even catches up. That's what gratitude does for your inner state. It bypasses the mental noise and goes straight to the emotional climate. Feeling it real, Neville taught, isn't about hype or excitement. It's about settling into a calm knowing. People often misunderstand abundance as a high-energy vibe, but he laughs gently at that idea. Abundance isn't loud, it's steady. It feels like safety, like ease, like being held. That emotional frequency dissolves lack because lack can't survive in an environment of internal trust. Lack and abundance. Neville teachings make it clear. Abundance begins as an inner softness long before it becomes money. He once shared a story about a woman who shifted everything in her life by practicing a single feeling: relief. Every morning before looking at her phone, she closed her eyes and imagined a quiet wave of relief washing over her. She didn't visualize money or specific events, just that feeling. And within months, her entire financial situation improved. She felt the end like Neville Goddard talked about dissolving from the inside out. He encourages people to stop chasing emotions they don't naturally feel and instead find the closest available version. If certainty feels too far, choose calm. If abundance feels too big, choose relief. These transitional emotions build the bridge. The law of assumption explained simply means, assume a feeling that matches the version of you who already has. Not perfectly, just faithfully. He often compares emotions to frequencies on a radio. If someone is tuned to anxiety, even good news sounds like a threat. If they're tuned to peace, even challenges feel manageable. Gratitude changes the station. Certainty locks it in. And imagination creates reality, because emotion fuels the inner picture far more than logic ever could. He likes teaching that peace is not passive, it's powerful. When someone genuinely feels at peace, they stop making frantic decisions. They recognize opportunities more clearly. They trust themselves. They stop leaking energy through worry. It's no wonder abundance flows more easily from this state. The wish-fulfilled identity Neville Goddard described is grounded, not frantic. He often tells people to think of gratitude as mental lubrication. It keeps the internal gears from grinding. When someone starts appreciating what already exists, even the smallest things, the emotional pressure drops. And once the pressure drops, possibility rises. This is the emotional shift that quietly ends lack. He's observed that the moment someone anchors themselves in calm certainty, the world begins responding differently. They speak differently. They walk differently. They interpret events differently. Reality bends toward the identity they are embodying. Live in the end becomes natural because the emotional environment supports it instead of sabotaging it. So he always brings people back to the same truth. If you want lack to dissolve, don't push against it emotionally. Replace the frequency that feeds it. And once someone does that, the next challenge appears: how to deal with old patterns when they inevitably try to resurface. He often tells people that the moment they shift into abundance, the old patterns don't disappear instantly. They echo. Like the fading ring of a bell, those old reactions, thoughts, and triggers show up not because they're still true, but because they were practiced for so long. When someone reacts to them, they accidentally reinforce them. When they ignore them, the echo finally fades. He loves using the analogy of moving out of an old house. Even after the move, you sometimes catch yourself driving toward the old address out of habit, not because you still live there, but because your body remembers. Old lack patterns feel the same. They are muscle memory, not destiny. Feeling it real Neville style means noticing the pattern without renewing the lease. He once talked to a woman who shifted successfully into abundance, but panicked when an unexpected bill arrived. She thought she had failed, but he explained that the bill was just an echo, a remnant of the old assumption playing itself out. The wish-fulfilled identity Neville Goddard taught isn't invalidated by temporary appearances. It's validated by emotional stability when appearances wobble. He explains that echoes are neutral. They only become powerful when we give them meaning. If someone sees a delay or setback as a sign, they feed the old state. But if they see it as a leftover vibration losing power, the new state strengthens. This is the law of assumption explained practically. Your reaction determines which state wins. He likes reminding people that even after you end lack Neville Goddard style, your old self may still try to negotiate, bargain, or create drama. Not because it has authority, but because it's familiar. Familiarity masquerades as truth. That's why persistence is so essential. It teaches the subconscious which identity is the new default. He tells stories of people who almost quit right before their breakthrough. They mistook the final echoes for failure. One man felt financially secure for the first time in his life, and the next day his car broke down. He panicked, thinking he imagined wrong. But in hindsight, that moment was the last test of emotional loyalty. He stayed calm, and within weeks, everything stabilized. He loves explaining that new states don't require perfection, just consistency. If you slip into old reactions, don't shame yourself. Just return to the new identity. Feeling is the secret because it shifts you back into alignment faster than thinking your way there. The heart remembers the new state even when the mind temporarily forgets. He often uses the metaphor of changing lanes on a highway. When you switch lanes, the old lane is still right beside you. You can see it. You can drift toward it, but you're not in it anymore. Old thoughts are like the old lane, visible, familiar, but no longer yours unless you steer back into them. Imagination creates reality by keeping your attention aligned with the lane you've chosen. He teaches that the presence of old patterns doesn't mean you're manifesting the wrong thing. It usually means you're close. When the subconscious lets go of an identity, it releases the final fragments of it into awareness. Think of it as emotional detox, lack and abundance. Neville teachings describe this transition perfectly: old state dissolving, new state forming. So he encourages people to stay steady when the echoes arise. Don't wrestle them, don't judge them. Just let them pass like clouds that no longer belong to your sky. And once someone does that, they begin to notice something subtle and beautiful, early signs that lack is truly ending. He always tells people that the first signs of change aren't material, they're emotional. Before the money comes, before the opportunities appear, there's a subtle lightness in the chest, a moment where worry doesn't bite as hard, a tiny sense of ease where panic used to live. This emotional shift is the earliest indicator that the end lack Neville Goddard spoke of is unfolding invisibly. He likes explaining that these signs often show up when nothing external has changed yet. Someone wakes up feeling different, calmer, more grounded, not because circumstances improved, but because their inner reality has. Feeling it real, Neville taught, means the emotional atmosphere shifts before the physical world catches up. And that shift is the first victory. He once shared a story about a woman who felt unusually peaceful despite her financial situation being the same. It felt like the storm was still there, but I wasn't in it anymore, she said. That's the law of assumption explained at work. Identity had shifted. The outer world hadn't reflected it yet, but the inner world had already moved on. He loves pointing out that early signs often look like coincidences. A random discount appears on something you needed. A bill turns out lower than expected. Someone offers help without being asked. These aren't luck, they're soft ripples from the new assumption. Lack and abundance. Neville teachings show that small synchronicities are the universe adjusting to your new emotional frequency. He encourages people to pay attention to moments of unforced ease, the parking spot that appears at the right time, the email that resolves something you were worried about, the conversation that opens a new door. These moments happen quietly, almost shyly, before the big manifestations. They whisper, "You're aligned. Keep going." He likes to remind people that signs of progress often look like reduced resistance. You react less, you panic less, you don't spiral as quickly, you breathe more. Peace becomes accessible. This emotional stability is a sign that imagination creates reality because the emotional blueprint has shifted from scarcity to sufficiency. He's watched people feel confused because things suddenly feel too easy. They expect growth to be dramatic, but abundance flows in simplicity. When the wish-fulfilled identity Neville Goddard taught starts to settle in, life stops feeling like a battle. The internal fight dissolves, and when the fight ends, abundance has room to enter. He often tells people to track how they interpret challenges. In the old state, a delay meant disaster. In the new state, a delay feels neutral, even purposeful. This shift in interpretation is a massive sign. It proves the subconscious has adopted a new baseline of certainty. Feeling is the secret, because emotional interpretation is more powerful than external fact. He loves explaining that early signs rarely look like the final outcome. They're subtle adjustments, like the air changing before a new season arrives. You may notice more clarity, better ideas, or random motivation to take action you once avoided. These aren't forced, they flow from the new identity. Live, in the end, becomes easier, because the self finally aligns with it. So he tells people to celebrate these small signs, not overlook them. They are the first cracks of light breaking through the old state, and when someone recognizes them, they naturally step deeper into embodiment, the stage where abundance stops being something they pursue and becomes something they live. He always says, there's a moment in the journey where something subtle but transformative happens. The trying stops, not because someone gives up, but because effort turns into identity. Abundance stops being a goal and becomes a natural part of who they are. This is the wish-fulfilled identity Neville Goddard emphasized, living from the state, not chasing it. He loves explaining that embodiment feels quiet. People imagine it as confidence and certainty, but it's usually simplicity. You stop checking for signs. You stop asking, how long will it take? You stop negotiating with the universe. The internal struggle dissolves. Feeling it real, Neville taught, becomes second nature, like breathing. He once coached a man who spent years drowning in self-help techniques, affirmations, journaling, vision boards. He tried everything, but nothing shifted until he started acting as someone who expected good things instead of hoping for them. That expectation was the embodiment. Imagination creates reality because expectation is a form of lived belief. He often compares embodiment to moving into a new home. At first it feels unfamiliar, maybe even awkward, but after a while your body knows where everything is without thinking. You navigate with ease. The same happens internally. Once abundance becomes your emotional home, navigating life starts feeling effortless. End lack. Neville Goddard taught begins here. He likes to point out that deep embodiment rewires decision-making. You stop choosing out of fear and start choosing out of alignment. A person in lack hesitates, doubts, and shrinks. A person in abundance moves with clarity. They don't make impulsive decisions, they make confident ones. Lack and abundance. Neville teachings make this contrast unmistakable. He tells people to notice when their new identity starts making choices automatically. Maybe they say no to things that once drained them. Maybe they say yes to opportunities that once intimidated them. These choices aren't forced, they're the natural extension of the state. The law of assumption explained means you assume internally, then life organizes externally. He's watched people wake up one day and realize they no longer obsess over money, not because they suddenly became millionaires, but because fear no longer governs their inner world. When fear stops being the narrator, abundance quietly steps in as the new storyteller. This emotional neutrality is a hallmark of embodiment. He often shares that embodiment brings an unexpected gift: relief. You stop micromanaging the process. You live your life. You trust that your inner state is already doing the work. Feeling is the secret, because once the feeling settles, the manifestation becomes a natural byproduct, not a pursuit. He likes teaching that deep embodiment turns the desire into identity. It's no longer "I want abundance," but "I'm the kind of person abundance gravitates toward." And from that state, everything becomes easier. Money, opportunities, timing, intuition. Live in the end becomes your default instead of your practice. So he gently guides people to stop trying so hard and start being. Trying belongs to lack, being belongs to abundance. And once someone fully becomes, the final understanding becomes clear. Lack persists only when you assume it. Change the assumption and the world changes with you. He always says that lack isn't a condition, it's an assumption. And assumptions feel so familiar that people mistake them for facts. When someone believes "I never have enough," the world faithfully mirrors that identity back. Not as punishment, but as alignment. This is the law of assumption explained in its clearest form. You can only meet the version of reality that matches who you think you are. He loves using the metaphor of wearing tinted glasses. If the lens is scarcity, everything looks limited, risky, or out of reach. If the lens is abundance, the same world looks full of openings and resources. Imagination creates reality, because the lens shapes interpretation long before circumstances do. People aren't trapped by life. They're trapped by the lens they forget they're wearing. He once coached a woman who constantly said, "Something always goes wrong at the last minute." And guess what? It did. Not because she was cursed, but because she mentally rehearsed that outcome so consistently that her identity aligned with it. When she shifted her assumption to "everything unfolds in my favor," small miracles began appearing everywhere. End lack. Neville Goddard taught begins exactly there. He often reminds people that assumptions don't need to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes they're small, almost whispered, "This might not work, it's probably too late, I'm not the kind of person who..." These tiny thoughts shape entire timelines. Feeling it real Neville style means upgrading those whispers into affirming inner truths. You replace the quiet doubt with quiet knowing. He teaches that lack doesn't come from circumstances, it comes from identification with a self who expects loss. If you keep identifying as the person who struggles, life agrees. If you identify as someone supported, life agrees just as strongly. Lack and abundance. Neville teachings show that the world is neutral until identity gives it instructions. He often points out that lack survives through habit, not reality. People rehearse fear so often that it becomes their emotional default. But defaults can be rewritten. When someone gently and consistently chooses a new emotional standpoint, relief, calm, certainty, the old identity weakens. Feeling is the secret, because emotion is what cements identity into place. He likes telling people that abundance is nothing more than the absence of assumed lack. When the assumption dissolves, abundance flows through the gaps naturally. It's not about attracting, it's about allowing. The wish-fulfilled identity Neville Goddard described doesn't chase outcomes, it embodies them, and embodiment shuts the door on scarcity. He often says that once you stop assuming lack, you stop acting like someone who is running out of time, money, or options. Your decisions shift, your intuition sharpens. You move with the steady confidence of someone who expects life to work. And when expectation changes, reality follows without resistance. Live in the end becomes your emotional baseline. He's seen people shift their entire financial reality simply by changing who they believed themselves to be. They didn't suddenly inherit wealth or discover hidden opportunities. They stepped into an identity where abundance felt natural, even inevitable. The world adjusted to match the internal blueprint. That's the power of assumption in motion. So he gently reminds anyone who feels stuck, you have the power to shift the assumption that's been running your life. And once that shift begins, something beautiful unfolds. You start recognizing the deeper truth behind why lack ever felt real in the first place, opening the door to the introduction that ties everything together. If everything you've heard today stirred something in you, it's because a deeper part of you already knows the truth. Lack was never your identity. It was just a state you practiced long enough to call normal. But now you've seen how the law of assumption explained by Neville Goddard reveals a different path, one where you're no longer the one who chases abundance, but the one who assumes it. So before you click away, Ask yourself something honest. What version of you have you been loyal to? The one who hopes, the one who waits, or the one who quietly knows creation is finished? Neville meant what he said. What would shift today if you chose to feel it real Neville style for just 5 minutes? What decision would you make if you trusted that imagination creates reality? And how would your day unfold if you lived, really lived, in the end, instead of waiting for signs? Lack only survives when you keep feeding it with identity. Abundance rushes in the moment you stop rehearsing the old story. If this message reminded you of something your soul had forgotten, then stay close. There is so much more for you to discover, so much more for you to become. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because every new video is another step into the version of you who already has, already is, and already lives the life you've been imagining. And remember, the world will always reflect the self you choose to be. Choose wisely, choose intentionally, choose abundance.